Most seventh-round picks vanish. Zetterberg almost did it himself. He sat in Detroit stands, watched the roar, and told a teammate he'd never play here. The pick was a joke. Even he believed it. He'd skipped his own draft for a beach in Cyprus. Then a phone rang. Stay in Sweden or chase something that didn't want him. The call from Cyprus came with a deadline attached. Håkan Andersson, Detroit's European scout, had Zetterberg's number, and the message was two parts. First part, good news. Second part, a problem. Development camp started in a matter of days, and the kid who had just learned he belonged to an NHL team was on a beach with 5 friends, nowhere near his skates. So he had a decision to make. That was how he put it later. Not excitement, a decision. The way Zetterberg even got on Detroit's radar is one of those stories that only makes sense in hindsight. In April 1998, Andersson and assistant GM Jim Nill were at an under-18 tournament in Finland, but they weren't there for Zetterberg. Andersson was trying to show Nill a Swedish forward named Mattias Weinhandel, the player they'd actually made the trip for. Nill kept getting distracted. There was this smaller kid who seemed to end up with the puck every single shift. Every time Nill looked up, it was the same guy. This little Zetterberg guy, Nill said later, who always seemed to have the puck. There was one more thing working in Zetterberg's favor that nobody outside Detroit knew about. Years earlier, the Red Wings had drafted a Swedish defenseman named Anders Eriksson. His older brother Jürgen played on Zetterberg's line at Timrå. When Andersson reached out to get a read on Zetterberg, Jürgen's endorsement was unambiguous. Anders Eriksson still jokes to this day that his family deserves a finder's fee. Without that connection, the name might have never made it to the list. You can understand why he skipped the whole thing. Where he came from didn't produce NHL players. Njurunda is a small place near Sundsvall, with a few hundred people, and his hockey education ran through the local club where his father coached. That detail matters more than it sounds. His father didn't just put him on the ice, he gave him the thinking that shaped the player. Look around before you go to the corner, know where your teammates are, and know who's about to hit you. You're a small guy, so keep your head up or you'll get hurt. That's not abstract advice. That's the exact habit, reading the ice a half second before everyone else, that NHL coaches would later build entire game plans around. It started with a father on a small-town rink telling his kid to pay attention. He left for Timrå at 15. At 17, he did a stretch in the Swedish army because Sweden still had conscription then, and being good at hockey didn't get you out of it. None of that is a development pipeline. It's a kid who was good at his sport in a country that's good at the sport, with no particular reason to think the rest would follow. And for 3 years after the draft, it didn't. Zetterberg signed nothing, moved nowhere. He played 2 full seasons in the SHL with Timrå while Detroit basically forgot he existed. No project, no monthly phone calls, no development staff flying over to work with him. He was a line on a depth chart in an office in Michigan. They were waiting to see if he turned into anything, and they were in no hurry to find out. Here's the part that gets lost. Those 2 seasons weren't Detroit's plan, but they ended up being the reason any of this worked. Zetterberg said it himself years later.
I got drafted. I was in Cyprus with 5 of my best friends. It's a holiday, summer holiday.
If Detroit had rushed him over at 19 into that roster, it would have buried him. Instead, he stayed home, played men's hockey, went to 2 world championships and an Olympics for Sweden, and grew up as a player on his own clock. The neglect did him a favor. When he finally signed his entry-level deal in 2002, the wait was over. But the wait had never been the hard part. The hard part was the building he was about to walk into. Stop for a second, because the Detroit room in 2002 needs explaining, or none of what follows lands the way it should. This wasn't a young team looking for help. The Red Wings had just won the Stanley Cup. The roster was Steve Yzerman, Sergei Fedorov, Nicholas Lidstrom, Brett Hull, Brendan Shanahan, Luc Robitaille, and Dominik Hasek. That's not a list of good players. That's a list of players who all ended up in the Hall of Fame, sharing one locker room at the same time. A 22-year-old 7th rounder doesn't get eased into that. He gets measured against it from his first practice. And remember where his head was. Months earlier, he'd told a teammate out loud that he didn't think he could play there. Now he had to. There was no minor league cushion, no slow ramp. He made the team out of camp and never played a game in the minors in his life. His rookie year answered the question and then kept going. He put up 44 points in 79 games, which led every first-year player in the league. He finished second for the Calder Trophy, the Rookie of the Year award, beaten out by Barrett Jackman, a defenseman from St. Louis. He wasn't just hanging on at the edge of a stacked lineup. He was outproducing every rookie in the entire NHL while doing it inside the most demanding room in the sport. For a guy nobody had a plan for, that's making the people who joked about his name look like they missed something real. Part of what made it work was who was standing next to him. Yzerman was the captain, and Zetterberg watched how he carried it. Not the on-ice stuff alone, the way he held the room, the standard he sets, the way the whole operation pointed at him. Zetterberg was getting a close-up view of leadership from one of the best to ever do it, and he was paying attention. Years later, when Detroit handed Zetterberg the captaincy, he pointed straight back at this. Not to a coach, not to a system, having spent his early seasons close enough to Yzerman to see how the job actually worked. The second year tested him in a different way. Early in the season, he broke his leg against Vancouver and lost 21 games to it. A young player who's still proving he belongs does not want to spend 2 months in street clothes. But he came back and nearly matched his rookie numbers anyway, which told Detroit the first year hadn't been a fluke. The problem was he kept having to reestablish the same thing. Every setback reset the proving. He hadn't yet had a clean, full run where he could just build instead of recover. Detroit knew what they had now. What none of them knew was that the league was about to take the next season away from everyone. The 2004-05 NHL season didn't happen. The owners locked the players out, and the two sides couldn't agree on a salary system, and in February, the league did something no major American sports league had ever done. It canceled the entire season. No games, no playoffs, no Stanley Cup awarded. The first time that had happened since 1919. Around 75 NHL players scattered to clubs in Sweden alone. The best league in the world simply switched off, and nobody knew for how long. For most NHL players, this was a dead time, an unpaid gap to wait out. For Zetterberg, 2 seasons in and still building towards something, it should have been worse than dead time. It should have been a reset. He went home and played for Timrå again, back in the Swedish league, back in the same building where he'd started, after finally clawing his way into the NHL. On paper, that's a step backward by a couple of years. What happened instead is the part most people skipped, because nobody in North America was tracking Swedish hockey that closely. Zetterberg didn't tread water over there. He led the entire SHL in scoring. 50 points in 50 games, a record for that lockout season. And the scoring isn't even the important number. The important thing is what that year of hockey did to his game. The Swedish league asked a forward to do more in his own end than the NHL did at the time. A full season carrying that responsibility didn't dull him. It hardened the two-way habits his father had planted years earlier. The reading, the positioning, the work away from the puck, into something automatic. The exact thing coaches would later trust him with in any situation, against anyone, was getting forged during the season everyone assumed was lost. So, when the lockout ended, and the NHL came back in 2005-06, Zetterberg didn't come back the same. He came back as a different tier of player. He scored 85 points in 77 games, the second best season he would ever have. Detroit made him an alternate captain. He became part of what people started calling the Swedish Five, the all-Swedish unit Detroit could roll out together. The year that was supposed to cost him his momentum had quietly handed him more of it than a normal season ever could have. He was a star now, no argument left to have about it, but the timing cuts both ways. The core that won in 2002 was getting older, and the window for that specific group to win again was closing fast. Zetterberg had shown up right as Detroit needed somebody to carry the next stretch of the franchise. The whole organization was about to lean on him. The only open question was whether he could take that weight. He could. The 2008 playoffs are the answer, and they're the high point of everything that came before. Zetterberg put up 27 points in 22 playoff games that spring and dragged Detroit to the Stanley Cup. He scored the goal that stood up as the winner in Game 6 against Pittsburgh. He won the Conn Smythe Trophy as the most valuable player of the entire postseason. And the moment people still bring up wasn't even a goal. It was a shift in Game 4. Detroit was killing a two-man advantage, and Zetterberg was on the ice for it, the 5-on-3 lasting 1 minute and 26 seconds. At one point, he tied up Sidney Crosby's stick at the side of the net, preventing what would have been a tap-in goal. The crowd started chanting MVP while he was still out there working. No player drafted lower than him has ever won that trophy. The afterthought from the 7th round had just been the best player in the sport for 2 straight months. Detroit responded in the way you'd expect a team to respond to that. In January 2009, they signed him to a 12-year, $73 million contract, the longest and richest contract in franchise history. The team wasn't just paying him. It was announced that the next decade of the organization was being built on him specifically, the player they'd once treated as a name to fill out a draft list. That kind of deal isn't only about money. It's a standard he now has to meet every single night for years because the contract had said out loud who he was supposed to be. His body, though, started keeping a different schedule than his career did. The back went first, and it went slowly, which is almost worse than going fast. He stopped taking full practices so he'd have something left for games. He spent his off-seasons grinding on core work year after year because that maintenance was the price of staying on the ice at all. People inside the team could see what it was costing him. The public mostly couldn't because he kept showing up. In 2014, he had surgery on a herniated disc and missed a stretch of the season. He came back from that one too. The end, when it came, didn't look like the end of a career that size. There was no farewell tour, no final game with the building standing for him. In September 2018, at the start of training camp, Detroit's general manager, Ken Holland, told reporters Zetterberg was finished.
He's got a degenerative condition in his back. Part of the degenerative condition is significant arthritis. Nothing can be done to, no back surgery, no rehab, no more time off is going to have any positive impact.
Playing on would only speed the damage. So he decided his life away from the rink was worth more than the risk. There were still 3 years and tens of millions of dollars left on that contract, untouched. The calendar wasn't telling him to stop. His back was. What he said about it afterward was about as plain as it gets. It was emotional. It had been 15 years, and he wished he could have played a little longer.
Obviously, it is emotional. It's been 15 years here, and even though I knew that I was on my last, I wish that I could play a little bit longer.
Sit with how thin the margins were. Anderson was at that 1998 tournament for a completely different player. Nil happened to be the one who kept noticing the kid with the puck. The report landed on Detroit's desk and not on someone else's. And a 22-year-old who had already decided in his own head that he couldn't play there got on the plane anyway, instead of staying in a country where a good, comfortable career was sitting right there waiting for him. Move any of those pieces an inch, and Detroit's last great era has a different shape, or a different name running it. Here's something worth holding on to. When Detroit needed a captain, they handed the C to Zetterberg, the same letter worn by Yzerman, then Lidstrom before him. A team that once mentioned his name as a punchline ended up trusting him to be its voice. He retired 5th in franchise history in goals, assists, and points. Not bad for a kid who told a friend he'd never play there. So here's my question for you. Was Detroit lucky, or did they just see something early? Drop your take in the comments. If this one was worth your time, super thanks always means a lot. And please subscribe, because the next story I've got lined up might be the one you least expect.